Thank you all for joining us this evening for the Animal Law Lecture funded by the Kirkpatrick Foundation. So thank you to the foundation for making that possible. Our speaker today is Professor Rick Cupp. Rick Cupp is a widely recognized as an influential animal law scholar and animal welfare advocate. He serves as the John W. Wade Professor of Law at Pepperdine Caruso School of Law. Professor Cupp is a member of the American Law Institute and is a fellow of the American Bar Foundation. Professor Cupp's work addressing animals' legal needs and moral status has been highlighted in books and in publications such as The New Yorker, The Washington Post, The Atlantic, National Geographic, Science Magazine, The New Republic, and Popular Science. In 2015, Popular Science described him as hugely influential, not moderately, hugely influential, regarding the issue of animal legal personhood. Since then, 3 unanimous appellate courts have cited Professor Cupp in rejecting animal legal personhood arguments. Earlier this month, The New Yorker profiled Professor Cupp as an animal welfare proponent who is a key figure in the increasingly active animal legal personhood debate. Richard Cupp is also a friend and former colleague of mine. When we were looking at how we could grow our program here at Oklahoma City University, Rick Cupp was one of the first people I called. He's just a wonderful guy, husband, father, friend, and he's really good at ultimate frisbee, so I've heard. So I bring Richard Cupp.
Thank you. I wasn't even sure that Dean Butler, was going to fess up to being a friend of mine, and so he dove all the way in. He's going to live with the consequences. So thank you so much, Dean Butler. Thank you, Dean Roth, for inviting me, and thank you, Ms. Hildreth Kelly, for being. I'm not sure if I see her tonight, but I want to be thankful to her. All 3 of you have been so kind to me, and the law school community has been very, very kind to me, and I'm very humbled and honored to get to talk with you tonight, share with you, and maybe learn a little bit from you as well. Let me start with a little bit of learning from you. How many of you have a dog or a cat that is very important in your life? Show of hands. Okay, I kind of suspected. If you didn't see everybody's hand is up. We got about 100% participation so far here, so I'm learning about you, and I wanted to let you know I now know something about you. You revealed something with that hand going up. A lot of you think that your pet might be the smartest, coolest, cutest, or overall best dog or cat in the world. Not all of you, but a lot of majority of you think that. It's possible. Okay, now, those of you who are cat people, I'm going to let you off the hook. But if you're a dog person, I've got difficult news for you. Let's see if I can get to the difficult news. Here we go. This is Wally. Wally and I both agree that property is the appropriate, a special, very special, unique property is an appropriate paradigm between human and animal relationships, but we gently differ regarding who is the owner and who is the owned. Okay? Wally is my owner, and I've given this a lot of thought, and I've reflected on it a lot, and I have concluded that Wally is indeed the coolest, cutest, smartest dog in the world. So I'm sure that all of you, your dogs are a close second, a tie, probably, but this is it. Now, why am I doing this? I love to talk about my dog. It's actually sincerely a kick for me to be able to show you a picture of my dog and show off my dog. And I know a lot of you are the same way. As a matter of fact, after the talk, come up, please. If you've got one, I want to see the pictures. Okay, and what this does, it reflects big changes that are going on in our society. They're actually relevant to what we're talking about. I and probably everyone in this room, shown by having your interest in talking about this subject, have a very strong attachment to the companion animals in our lives. And indeed, if you went throughout society and looked at our level of attachment with our companion animals today, And compared it to what we might have seen 50 years ago or 100 years ago, I dare say we'd see a big difference. And that's one of the reasons we're talking. We are changing in our society how we look at animals. I think any of us who have even thought about the issue a little bit can see that. There's evolution going on with regard to societal perspectives on the appropriate treatment of animals, and law always evolves following societal evolution. Society and our with our legal system, society never evolves without law reflecting that evolution in some way, right? So it's a given that with strong societal evolution regarding how we look at animals, we're going to have strong legal evolution. I'm going to start off real quickly with a couple of reasons that I think you'll find intuitive probably for why we're changing so dramatically with how we look to animals. First one is just what I was teasing out with me being so crazy about my dog. By the way, I'll accept with respect your arguments if you think yours is cuter and cooler and all that, but Wally agrees with me. Changing attitude towards pets. We're shifting from an agrarian society to an urban, suburban society. For just a couple statistics on that, this won't be shocking to you. 1935, when my dad was 4 and my mother was 1, they were born on farms in Indiana, right next door to each other, actually, on farms in Indiana. We had 7 million farms in the United States. My parents are now deceased, but so are a lot of those farms. We're down to 2 million farms in the United States. Many fewer of us having that farm experience. I grew up, when I was young, my parents moved to Silicon Valley in Northern California. Dramatically different culture, right, than the generation before me. 41% of American workforce in 1900, primarily farming. Now, those who list primarily farming, a little over 1% in the United States. This statistic you may have seen if you care about animals, very dramatic to me. Just expenditures on companion animals or pets. 19 years, almost 4 times the number of expenditures. And it wasn't really that small back in 2001. Someone my age, that doesn't even seem like that long ago, but we've just about quadrupled in 19 years with that. And you follow the money, right? That reflects strongly. We look at our companion animals differently, fundamentally differently as a society than we did several years ago. Okay, let's go back to my number 2 thing here on change, and that is expanding scientific understanding of animals' cognitive capacities. Now, if you follow the news at all, animal news or just news generally, I'll bet there's rarely a month that goes by where you don't see some news story about some animal having some capacity that's stronger than was previously understood. Okay? I won't give you I think this is a point I don't need to belabor too much. I just threw up off the top of my head 8 or 10 species of animals where you could point to in recent years, more than one, most of them, studies showing, more capacities than we used to understand. And this is a very partial list. I don't think I have ants on there. I'm pretty sure ants could be included. They're all you just always getting new information about animals having greater capacities than we used to think. That's going to change the way we perceive how animals should be valued, how they should be treated. If an animal has greater cognitive capacities, it might have greater appreciation of suffering or loneliness or deprivation or something like that. So our brains are going to take that information into account, and we're going to want to evolve to try to get to an appropriate place with regard to how to treat animals given those things. So I don't think my assertion that we're changing is very controversial, but it's a good starting point for why this is becoming such a hot topic. Change is in the air. Change has been in the air for at least the last 20 or 30 years. Fairly dramatic change, we'll talk about in a little bit, but it's just getting hotter and hotter. We're really zeroing in on this issue more than we used to. So what I want to do next is I want to talk about some different frames that we can have, as maybe a social scientist might put it, different conceptualizations of how we should view animals' legal status. I'm going to talk about animal rights, this concept a little bit. I'm going to talk animal welfare. I'm going to break down animal rights into some subset perspectives. And I'll talk about, with each of these concepts, some arguments in favor of a particular way of thinking, and then also some challenges to that way of thinking. One thing I want to be clear about as I get started is I'm going to give some criticisms of every approach that I know of people in terms of how we might look at how we should treat animals. And I don't want that to come across as being disrespectful. My perception is that if we are respectful with each other when we differ, perhaps even sharply differ, with regard to what is the most appropriate way to deal with animals' legal status, we're going to do the best for animals and humans. So I want to model that and be respectful. So I'm giving that caveat before I start going into some criticisms. Okay, let's talk about animal rights first as a concept. The way this is often phrased, this is the classic formulation. I'm sure in your animal law class you've seen this talked about. Should we have an animal rights approach, or should we have an animal welfare approach? Well, we'll talk about animal welfare more a little bit later, but let's start with animal rights. There are at least two, we could break this down more in more detail, maybe in your animal law class you have. I'll be a little bit general and say there are at least two significant interpretations of animal rights that are used. A big theme for me to try to get across with animal rights is many of us are fuzzy when we conceptualize animal rights, regardless of our position. Certainly not everyone's fuzzy with what they think with regard to animal rights, but a lot of people probably use the term, sometimes meaning very different things with the term, and maybe not even realizing always the breadth of difference that might be there, or how differently someone could perceive something who is using the same term, animal rights, that this person is using. So I want to unpack that a little bit, reveal that a little bit, and look at what the implications are for a couple of these interpretations. Now, this concept of soft animal rights versus strong animal rights, this is not language that I originated. I read about a philosopher who went into this a little bit, but I liked the way she framed it, and I think it's a useful way of talking about different ways to perceive animal rights. I said we can be a little bit confused or a little fuzzy sometimes we use the animal rights concept. Let me tell you about a poll that I think really gives an insight as to this. There's a famous poll, it's cited a lot in animal rights literature, animal law literature, from 2015, Gallup. There's an earlier poll done in 2008 by Gallup. So Gallup's been doing this poll for a while. The numbers were a little lower, I think, in the 2008 poll, but not that much lower. Something that kind of shocked me the first time I read it, 32% of Americans, this poll was meant to be representative of American thought, 32% said same rights as humans, exact same rights as people, to be free from harm and exploitation. Okay, very strong support. And this statistic has been cited a lot of times for, wow, a lot of people want really strong animal rights, so we really got to change our legal system dramatically, because look at the trend, this is the future going in this direction. Okay, a moment to unpack this. I think definitely this statistic has a lot of significance, but I also think we got to think about it a little bit in terms of how we interpret it. I'm floating something today that I'm going to try to call the cannibalism conundrum. And I talked to my wife about this for a while. I think I was confusing for a while. My wife's a lot smarter than me, so I might be confusing on this tonight too. But I'm going to try it with you and see what you think. Apparently, 3/4 of that 32% that say same rights as humans eat meat. Gallup, some people are getting where I'm going with this already. Okay, Gallup came up with a poll in 2018, 5% vegetarian, 3% vegan in the United States. Some polls have lower numbers, but that's one of the higher numbers you'll see. I'll stick in with Gallup since they're doing the other poll. If that's true, 32 minus 8 is 24. 24% of people both say that animals should have exactly the same rights as people, but eat animals. Now, if those people are okay with eating humans, I think we're perfectly logically consistent. Okay? If they have a second thoughts about eating humans, then we might have some difficulty with those statistics being logically consistent. And I think they probably don't believe that cannibalism is okay. What might be going on here? There might be some of us that aren't, when we hear, should they have the same rights of humans, we hear it sort of as, should we really care about animals, right? And saying yes to that question might reflect a very strong perspective that I'm really dedicated to animals. We haven't done enough for animals. We've got to do more. And that it might be, if you don't have to think through all the implications, tempting to say that. Or people might think, yeah, I do one thing, I wish I did another. That's another possibility as well, and there's probably some percentage that's in that group as well. I spoke to one person one time who was a law professor, so she may be nerdier than most people and thought about this in quite a bit of depth, and she said, oh, I'm completely hypocritical on this. I absolutely believe animals and humans should have exactly the same rights, but I'll eat animals any day of the week because I'm weak and miserable or something like that. And I thought, okay, well, there's a refreshing self-evaluation, but probably a lot of us don't think quite that deeply about it. I suspect a lot of the people who have said this and then don't do it are trying to say, I really care about animals. And that seems to be a statement that says that. So we might have to take it with a bit of a grain of salt, or I don't want to be completely dismissive, rather say it's nuanced, right? When people say animal rights, I don't know that we can take it at surface value that they mean exactly this or that. Okay, so that's messiness with animal rights. Now let's look at what I think are what can be described as the two major ways of looking at this rights paradigm. Soft animal rights can be defined as believing that rights exist if legal protections exist. Under this perception of rights, all domesticated animals would have some rights, right? Because there are at least some legal protections for all domesticated animals. Not only companion animals, but cows, pigs, horses, etc. There are at least some laws protecting them. Maybe we think there should be more in a lot of cases, but there's some legal protection for every animal. And you could say, well, that means if somebody mistreats the animal in a way that violates our legal rule, they can be punished or suffer some sort of penalty, and therefore the animal has a right. Okay? There's a case that I think does a great job of illustrating this perspective. It's from 2013. It's a United States District Court case from the Southern District of California down in San Diego. An animal rights group brought a lawsuit naming Tilikum, one of the orcas at SeaWorld in San Diego, as the plaintiff. You might have seen this in your animal law class. Tilikum suing SeaWorld, saying, SeaWorld, you're violating the 13th Amendment prohibition against slavery. Okay, the court in about a nanosecond rejected the claim, saying, no, only legal persons can be slaves, and orcas are not persons. So they took the personhood thing and just, drop-kicked it real quickly. But then the court, as if to maybe placate the animal rights group a little bit, said, we're not saying that Tilikum doesn't have rights. Tilikum does have rights because there are protections for orcas. SeaWorld can't do whatever it wants to the orcas, and therefore Tilikum has rights. Tilikum just isn't a person. Okay, I think that's whether you agree with the case or not, it's a really clean illustration of pretty powerful court asserting that animal rights don't necessarily mean you don't have to support personhood to be a rights advocate. Okay, so I kind of suspect, maybe more than kind of, I strongly suspect that most people who say that they support animal rights fit into this soft rights interpretation. If they really got pressed to the wall about it, probably more would go for this approach than a stronger approach. An advantage of this approach over just saying I like animal welfare is it sounds more consequential. Right? There's a famous scholar from Harvard who wrote about the romance of rights, how we've come to develop this conceptualization since the civil rights movement that rights are an unmitigated good, and so if something's a right, then that's a more powerful way of framing or stating something. And so, yes, let's say animal rights, even if it's just a protection that the animal cannot itself enforce through a guardian, because that will lead us toward a mindset in which we have greater protection for animals. So I think that is a strong advantage, one of the stronger advantages of using that conceptualization. A couple of disadvantages also. One disadvantage is that it would be an interpretation of rights that's different from every other interpretation of rights that we use in law. Every other place in law where we use the concept of legal rights, we're talking about something that the right holder can assert, either directly themselves or through a guardian, for example, if it's an infant or if it's a person with a significant cognitive limitation is not competent, a guardian can assert the right. You can't do that with soft animal rights. There's no provision for the personhood of the rights asserter. So you could say, well, it's just a very strange or strained concept of rights to say that there are rights there. There's also an argument that can be made that it gives a misimpression that the protections for the animal are stronger than they actually are. In other words, some people might say it allows us to sleep too well at night, right? If we say we're animal rights people, but really we're soft animal rights people, we can sound aggressive or ambitious, very dedicated, but really not have as much oomph behind it as if we were fully in with strong animal rights. Maybe it just makes us feel better about ourselves. There's also criticism that can be made that it can cause confusion and can make the strong animal rights position appear stronger than it is because you have a larger percentage of people who say they're animal rights people, whereas if they really got pressed against the wall, a lot of them would have significantly different views from another, perhaps smaller subset that has a more extreme interpretation. Okay, so let's get to that stronger interpretation, strong animal rights as we'll call them. The concept here is generally stated that in order to have rights, you've got to have the ability to assert those rights. So humans all have strong rights because we are all legal persons, right? And even if we're infants or legally incompetent, a guardian can come and assert our rights for us. Similarly, you would, if you're a strong animal rights person, say that animals, or at least some animals, should have legal personhood. Obviously, a chimpanzee or an elephant is not going to march into a courtroom and file a habeas corpus writ, but you, just like an infant, you could have a guardian who's looking out for the interests of the chimpanzee or the elephant go into court, and with the animal being the party, get permission from the court to serve as the animal's guardian, to act in the animal's interests, and seek some consideration directly for the animal as a legal person. Okay, a significant attraction of strong rights is, wow, that's powerful. That which I guess it's going to be an attraction and a scary part, depending on one's perspective about this approach. If any animals have legal personhood, those animals to whom it is assigned suddenly get a lot more face time in court. Not the animal literally, but their concerns and their interests, or what is perceived to be their concerns and their interests. It's going to make it much easier for animal rights activists to get in front of courts with litigation, to file lawsuits, if they can say, hey, all these chimpanzees, all these elephants, all these pigs, however far it's going to go, are legal persons, and we don't like the way the pigs are being crated, or whatever the issue is. Before, where you maybe had to try to get the USDA to bring an action or something like that, now you can see just a huge proliferation of actions by individual groups or animal rights individual attorneys who say, I should be the guardian, or there should be someone else named the guardian of the animal, and I'll represent the interests of the animal in justice. So if we really want drama with saying, we got to change big with animals right away, this is the most powerful tool, at least in the short term, for doing it. Whether it would be good in the long term, we'll leave for a moment, but certainly cannot be said not to be powerful. Think about it a little bit. I mentioned pigs as an example. Right now, when you're seeing lawsuits associated with this, you're usually seeing chimpanzees, elephants, some talk about orcas. We don't have much economic use for elephants and chimpanzees. We don't even do biomedical research on chimps anymore, as of about 10 years ago, 8 or 10 years ago. But what about pigs? Pigs are really smart, right? I'm just picking one animal. And if the argument that chimps and elephants should be legal persons succeeds, certainly see people will be arguing for pigs and other species down the line, you can't probably eat a legal person, right? So if a pig becomes a legal person, we're not going to eat elephants and chimpanzees, but if suddenly we get pigs or laboratory animals like mice, rats, they're mammals are all pretty smart, and say you can't do biomedical research on them, even if it saves millions of lives, that's powerful stuff, right? It's a very, very powerful remedy for better or for worse for society. Okay, so those are the attraction is the wow factor, the oomph factor, that we can make a change right now factor. I want to talk to you a little bit about a debate that's going on in the strong animal rights community, as I will call it. And this is not a new debate, but it's one that's just ramped up, I think, as all of this is getting a lot more attention in recent years. There are two groups of strong animal rights supporters that would both like to say, let's go strong, let's create legal personhood for animals, but different perceptions on how to get there. I'll mention first an approach based on intelligence and autonomy. This is the approach that's being litigated the most right now. If you've been seeing in the news at all or in your animal law class, hearing about lawsuits that have been going on in the last few years about legal personhood for animals, they've mostly involved chimpanzees and elephants, multiple elephants. They've been centered mostly in the Northeast, New York, Connecticut, at least one case, I think, in Massachusetts. And they have focused on the intelligence / autonomy of the particular animals to say, look, if we don't treat humans as different just because they're human, and we look at what is it that makes you eligible for rights, having a strong degree of autonomy should be a basis if we take what might be called speciesism out of it. And elephants and chimpanzees have very, very strong intelligence. We have a lot of good evidence of them having closer intelligence to humans than most other species of animals. At least one critic on the other side has called this the so like us approach, trying to kind of draw comparisons between the humans and the animals. So there's a case right now that's getting a lot of attention. This New Yorker article was mentioned that's just came out earlier this month, deals with a case getting lots of press in New York involving an elephant named Happy, who's at the Bronx Zoo in New York. And the allegation by an animal rights group is that Happy is unhappy. Happy's a 50-year-old elephant who, I won't take time to go through all the details because it's just more factual than legal, but there's a dispute between the zoo and the animal rights group as to Happy's happiness in her situation. And the animal rights group doesn't want to take Happy out, and they're bringing a habeas corpus action, which typically has only been allowed for humans. They're trying to apply it to the elephant. They don't want to let Happy loose on the streets, but they say instead Happy should be moved to a sanctuary where she would have more freedom, more autonomy, more ability to be the elephant she is. And the zoo's saying factually no, and that they think legally that's not the right approach either. So New York Court of Appeals, several courts have, appellate courts have unanimously rejected this concept. New York Court of Appeals, however, has taken this Happy case up on appeal, which it rarely does. It's kind of a big deal that they have. And next month, they're going to hear oral arguments. That's their high court. Most of us say Supreme Court for our states. I think Oklahoma has a Supreme Court, right? California has a Supreme Court. Of course, in New York, the Supreme Court is the trial court. Just do everything backward from how we do it. So the Court of Appeals there is the big tomato in New York, and they're going to take on this issue. So it's getting a lot of press, and it's going to be a really interesting decision when they rule on it. Okay, so that is one of the major approaches. If this wins with an elephant, very certainly I feel we're going to see more lawsuits brought for a wider range of animals. As a matter of fact, let me give you a slide from the group that brought the lawsuit. This is from, I think this is actually on their website. Our goal is very simply to breach the legal wall that separates all humans from all non-human animals. So this lawsuit is a way to get a hole in that wall, and then if that hole in the wall successfully made, I think it's a pretty safe bet to expect that you'll see more lawsuits with other intelligent animals, and that it's hard to know how far that's going to go. More on that in a little bit. Let me first go to the second major approach. And there are fights, not physical fights, but there are disagreements and arguments between these two branches often, even with regard to this happy case. We're seeing various voices saying they like that approach that's being done in that lawsuit, or they have some issues with it. This second approach basically seems to say you're not being ambitious enough by focusing on autonomy or intelligence. Because the question is not, are they the same as us? The question is, can they feel? Can they suffer? Right? And any being that is capable of suffering, this point of view would have, has strong interests in not suffering, or if they can experience pleasure, they have strong interest in experiencing pleasure. So they should have legal personhood to be able to assert what they need to assert to try to make their argument that they shouldn't go through the suffering that others might be making them go through, or be restrained from the pleasure that they would otherwise enjoy. Okay, one challenge with this, well, first let me say a plus along with the minus. The challenge kind of jumps out. The plus on this is you would be able to get a lot more animals protected. And it doesn't, if there can be a criticism of speciesism in general, and if humans are speciesist, one might be concerned that speciesist means like an irrational favoring of one group of entities just based on their species. That's the way the term is often used. But if we are speciesist about humans, is it perhaps also arguably speciesist about animals to say chimpanzees, at least for now, should get personhood and not necessarily pigs yet? We'll have to work about pigs later. Or elephants, yeah, we've shown they're smart enough, they're autonomous enough. If we instead focus on suffering, a lot of people would say, hey, that's the bigger issue than how close they are to humans, and you're going to get protection for a lot more animals. So a lot of animals, most of the animals that are suffering are not chimpanzees and elephants. Okay, that's an advantage. A criticism or a concern or a disadvantage is, whoa, that would be broad. If we granted legal personhood to all animals capable of suffering, and immediately we don't have to worry about how smart pigs are. We just have to worry about, can pigs suffer? Or can cows suffer? Or can little mice that are in all those experiments suffer? Well, of course they can. So we would see a really revolutionary change to our legal landscape overnight if we took that approach. Perhaps because it's so transparently revolutionary in comparison to the autonomy intelligence approach, which starts in a more modest manner by just looking at the smarter animals. You see less litigation so far. I've seen less litigation so far based on capacity to suffer. There is one super interesting case, horse case worth mentioning, Justice versus Virtue, going on right now in New York. I see someone nodding their head, they know that case. It's a case where a horse was horrifically neglected by its owner. It's difficult even to read the fact pattern. The neglect was so bad. And the owner was arrested, charged with neglect, pled guilty to criminal neglect. And then an animal rights organization brought a lawsuit, a tort claim, naming the horse, Justice wasn't the horse's, I think it was Shadow or something like that, the original name, but they got a new owner and changed, and they named it Justice, which was sort of ambassador for the cause. So Justice brought a lawsuit against the owner, Mrs. Vircher, or Ms. Vircher, excuse me, for tort damages for the neglect. And I'm probably going to oversimplify here, but I'm just doing the interest of time to give you a general idea of what's going on in the lawsuit. The basic thrust of it is Oregon case law has said animals may be victims of crimes. So, for example, in Oregon, if you abuse 20 horses, maybe you should have a bigger sentence than if you abuse one horse, because there's more suffering incurred with 20 horses. And that's Oregon case law. It seems fairly rational to me to say that. The animal rights group has said, oh, okay, human victims, or just let's take human out of it, victims of crime can bring tort actions against the tortfeasors who harmed them. And since Oregon has said that horses can be victims, horses should be able to bring tort lawsuits. So they filed a lawsuit. It's basically a legal personhood lawsuit, right? Because only a legal person can bring a lawsuit. The trial court threw out the lawsuit saying that would open the floodgates of litigation. If we said every time there's an assertion that an animal has been neglected, there can be a tort lawsuit in addition to whatever criminal sanctions are there. It's not where our state wants to go. It's now on appeal. Oregon Intermediate Appellate Court heard the case a long time ago, I think like a year and a half ago almost, but still hasn't rendered its opinion. And I'm pretty confident it'll go up to the Oregon Supreme Court, however they come down there. So that's an interesting case that I think you could describe as more of a capacity to suffer case than a autonomy intelligence case. Okay, so our introduction to some of the major point of views besides animal welfare. Let me give you some respectful and humble criticisms of the strong animal rights approach. Done that. Where am I going the wrong way? I am going the wrong way, sorry. My pointer at home goes a different direction with its arrows. Here we go. Here are some of the arguments that have been offered. One is it would be a very radical reordering of our legal system if we applied legal personhood to animals at all. And that the first time we do it, that would be the first step in what would be efforts for many steps. And there's no clear lines for limiting it. I'll give you a quote from a scholar, University of Virginia law professor Margaret Foster Riley. It's a change that's not just legal evolution, but revolution. There's no question this would be a fundamental change that goes beyond any notion of animal rights that we have today in the United States. And I think, I don't want to put words in her mouth, but I wouldn't be surprised. I want to say, I should be careful. It may be that Professor Riley would describe herself as an animal rights proponent, but she might fall closer to the soft rights perspective. But I won't assert that because I'm not absolutely 100% sure I'm remembering it correctly. In any event, she says this would be, she's against this idea. She says it would be, it would really throw things on their head if we did that. There is a second argument that's often proffered that if we went down this road, we would be violating basic tenets of our society in that legal personhood rights are intertwined with a norm of legal accountability, and only humans ever meet that norm. This is an interesting issue in that there's not a lot of case law on it until recent years. Actually, there's a growing body of case law on it with these personhood cases that are going on right now. But prior to this new surge of cases seeking personhood, not many courts had really gotten into this in a great depth because nobody ever imagined to claim that an animal could be a legal person. So there was never any reason for courts to go deeply into this issue. Several courts have been attracted to that line of reasoning in response to the current spate of animal legal personhood lawsuits. As a matter of fact, this is the line of reasoning you'll see most powerfully, I think, in the court decisions, the unanimous court decisions that are out there thus far. It's illustrated in the first international human rights instrument of the modern era after the horrors of World War II. A lot of nations realized we got to do more than we have with regard to human rights, and so human rights instruments started being developed. The very first one that was developed was in 1948. It's called the, went the wrong way again, sorry. It's called the American Declaration of the Rights and Duties of Man. And its preamble, I'm just going to read this, even though he'll say don't read slides. I'm going to read this one quickly for you. The fulfillment of duty by each individual is a prerequisite to the rights of all. Rights and duties are interrelated in every social and political activity of man. While rights exalt individual liberties, duties express the dignity of that liberty. Duties of a judicial nature presuppose others of moral nature, which support them in principle and constitute their basis. Now, when you go into this line of argument, you have to address at least a couple of things that might jump out to you as questions. First one is, hey, whoa, what about corporations? Right? Corporations are corporations like humans, especially if we go back to that language as I gave it to you. Only humans ever meet that norm. So why do corporations get personhood? Okay, I'm going to state agnosticism with regard to corporate personhood. That's probably a smart move, right? So I don't have to get into that morass. Or if we do go corporate personhood, how many rights we should give to corporations. But I haven't seen analyses of corporate personhood that have not acknowledged that corporations are viewed as mere proxies for their human owners. So the interests of corporations are a reflection of the duties and the rights of their human owners. Whether corporate personhood is good or bad, it is justified in relation to being a reflection of humanity. So I think it could be perceived as something that looks like a hardball. I've seen the question come up a lot, like, oh yeah, what about corporate personhood? But I personally never thought that was a super difficult one to answer. Another question that has to be responded to is, what about little kids? And what about people with significant cognitive limitations who don't have legal competence? We still treat them as persons, but they do not have legal accountability. Okay? Advocates of this approach, may have figured out, I'll admit I'm an advocate of this approach, will say, look, you got to zero in on the norm language. It's not saying that every individual human is morally accountable, capable of accountability before law, but that it is the norm of humans. And that when we look at a little baby or when we look at somebody who has a significant cognitive limitation, we don't look at them as a limited being first who may also be human. We look at them as a human who has some limitations that are often temporary. They're often limitations that they did not have in the past. For example, all of us know, we might not like to think about it, but we all know that we may become completely incapacitated with regard to our cognitive capacities at some point. As a matter of fact, most of us probably, at least for a short little period of time right before we die, we will be in that situation. It's part of the human condition through our evolution through life to spend time at the beginning, maybe toward the end, and sometimes in the middle, where we're not capable. But the personhood of humans who have limitations with their cognitive capacity is arguably based in their humanity. They're anchored in their humanity, their membership, appropriate membership in the human community, such that even if they do not individually have those capacities, they are important members of a community, the only community of which we're aware. By that I mean we don't have Neanderthals today. They might fit this if we had some. But today, only humans are the beings that have the capacity to have moral accountability in our legal system. It's a tragic case in 2012 of a chimpanzee at the Los Angeles Zoo who picked up another chimpanzee's baby and smashed its head against a rock wall, instantly killing the baby chimpanzee. And everybody would look at that as a tragedy, as something went on in that chimpanzee community. I would guess there'd be I believe chimpanzees have some morality, right? And there would be some moral implications for the chimps involved that we don't necessarily understand. But nobody would think, let's bring a murder claim, a murder action against that chimpanzee in a human court. It's just not an appropriate fit, the argument goes, and so personhood is not an appropriate fit. Final argument is that the autonomy intelligence approach, and note that this is separating the two strong approaches. This last criticism doesn't really apply to the broader approach focused on suffering. Because if we focus on suffering, we can say probably most people with significant cognitive limitations are capable of suffering, so that might protect their personhood too. But if you go down the intelligence autonomy route, which is the one being litigated the most now, there's an argument made that their future is endangered if we go down that path, because they might not fare very well over time with regard to an increasing emphasis on an individual being's cognitive capacities. This concern applies even if this new path to legal personhood is not necessarily the sole path to personhood. Even if it's a new path to personhood, but not the only one, there is still grounds for concern, the argument goes. A concern is that creating this new path would encourage courts and society to think increasingly about individual humans' cognitive ability when considering personhood, and the most vulnerable humans, people with significant cognitive limitations, do not seem likely to fare well if that's our mindset. If we're suddenly a lot more focused on, let's look carefully at each case at the cognitive abilities going on in thinking about personhood in any context. So those are some of the major criticisms. I'm really being loose with a lot of these things in the interest of time, but I'm trying to highlight some strengths and some weaknesses without trying to represent that I'm being comprehensive at all. All right, let me finally talk about animal welfare as a position with some strengths and some challenges. I think we're going the right way. Here we go. Animal welfare focuses on human responsibilities regarding treatment of animals, and says that we've got to reject the concept of standing for animals, but support laws that might provide appropriate balancing of animals' needs and human interests. So some advantages and disadvantages of this approach. First thing I want to mention is that this approach can overlap with the soft animal rights paradigm, right? So someone could say that they're an animal rights supporter and be very comfortable with what we have here on the board as the animal welfare approach, right? If you say, I think there are animal rights if there are protections for animals, but I don't think there should be legal personhood, you might decide to say, I'm an animal rights supporter, and the way I interpret animal rights is this way. Or you might decide to say, I like using the concept of animal welfare better than the concept of animal rights. Since I am an advocate of animal welfare, let me, before I go into more praises of this approach, I have careful praises of this approach. Before I go into those praises, let me give you some limitations that maybe will jump out at you. One is, remember I was saying an advantage of, say, especially a strong animal rights approach is the oomph, the power it's got. You're not going to get the level of dramatic change as quickly under an animal welfare paradigm as you're going to get with a personhood paradigm. It's much more nuanced. It's much less revolutionary. So if you really think we're messed up and we really just got to change right now, you got to wait for laws. And laws are going to come with human societal evolution, but a lot of people think not fast enough. A lot of people would say the animal welfare system has failed us, so we got to look to something else. Okay, so that's one criticism that is made. Another criticism is that the animal welfare approach doesn't sound real sexy, doesn't sound real daring, doesn't sound edgy. I wrote a law review article fighting this where I called it edgy animal welfare. Where my wife will tell you, you're not edgy about anything. that was my effort of saying, hey, look, if we're going to do animal welfare, we can't be complacent about it. We can't be status quo. But there's a criticism. A lot of people say, look, if you say you support animal welfare, that's too close to saying you support the status quo, and it just isn't going to be as appealing to people as something that sounds dramatic like animal rights. Now, if animal welfare, I'll try to be a little dramatic here, but appropriately so, if animal welfare does not evolve, it's going to die as an approach. There's absolutely no question in my mind because of the societal evolution we've talked about. Animal law cannot sustain the status quo because society is going to move, and you do hear critics saying, we got to dump animal welfare because it's already failed us. I don't think most people agree with that yet, but if they did, then we drop animal welfare. So I portray myself, or I view myself, as an ambitious animal welfare activist. Why do I go with animal welfare? The criticisms that I listed of the strong animal rights approach are persuasive to me. I think that it would be harmful to adopt animal legal personhood. And I'm not so uncomfortable with soft animal rights. It's kind of becomes I can see the debates on both sides. In substance, though, I'd say, animal welfare, whether we call it soft animal rights or not, is kind of where I land. But I support taking animal welfare seriously and saying, look, we've really got to, if you're going to go with the animal welfare paradigm, you're going to have to be activist, or you're going to get behind where society is going. One bit of good news, if you're an animal welfare supporter, is there has been dramatic change in our legal landscape in the last 30 years with regard to animal welfare. One illustration I like to use is felony charges for animal cruelty. If you went back 30 years ago, it would be rare to find a single state. There were a few states, but not very many states 30 years ago had felony eligible status for animal cruelty, even if it was really awful. 2014, South Dakota became the final of all 50 states to elevate animal cruelty to a felony in appropriate cases. In legal terms, that's pretty fast evolution, to go over a course of about 20 years. And I think if anything, we're speeding up since 2014 with regard to a perception of a need. I could give a long laundry list of changes that we've had in our legal landscape over the last 20 years, but this group probably doesn't need that list. We can say that's not enough. I'm totally open to those arguments. As a matter of fact, I've written a couple of law review articles, I'll probably close with this, talking about some ways that we haven't approached yet that I think we should probably get edgy with regard to animal welfare and not be so afraid of the animal rights paradigm if you're an animal welfare advocate, that you don't support some changes that could also be supported by strong animal rights advocates. So I find myself in the position sometimes of being in the same camp as a strong animal rights advocate, but really trying to articulate how we see this differently, even though in this particular issue we're coming to the same conclusion with the kind of protection that could be made. Quick illustration I'll give just to close is the idea of property as a word by itself to describe animals. I had a great conversation with some students at lunch, and a student raised this issue very insightfully with me. In so many places in our law, we have basically assertions, statements that animals are property. I mentioned before, my dog and I both agree with that. He thinks I'm his property. I think he's my property. But I guess if I'm trying to defend me calling him property, he is the most unique property in the world, especially him because he's the coolest dog in the world. But any dog or cat or other animal, if we're going to put the label property on them, which you have to do to have ownership or economic uses, I haven't seen a good alternative to doing that. You've got to make really clear this is a super unique kind of property. It's not like this podium, it's not like the chairs you're sitting on, that you can hit them or kick them and have no consequences. So I have advocated having every place in a judicial decision or in a statute where we say property and change it to say something like living property. It's a framing approach. It's not going to have an immediate substantive impact to do that, but sociologists will tell us, social scientists, excuse me, will tell us that the way we frame issues has substantive impacts over the long term, and we need to be very consciously thinking every time we think about animals, if we're going to call them property, that they are living. In a law review article, I go through like 13 different phrases that can be used. Unique property, sentient meaning capable of experiencing pain or pleasure. And I'm not the first person to come up with this idea. I acknowledge this in my article, but I have my own spin on some different ideas that have been used. And that's just one illustration that I'll give you of something that I think that we need to do that we haven't started doing yet. I think we need to do a lot of things. I think that we're closer to the early part of our evolution with an animal welfare paradigm than we are to where it's going to be kind of leveling off and we'll feel like, oh yeah, we got it now. But in any event, whether you agree with my perspective, it's not really my idea to be convincing you tonight, but rather exposing you to different ways of thinking about this. Whether you agree with my perspective or with one of the other perspectives that I've shared, I think that we're all going to benefit by thinking through implications of all of these different approaches. And as I've tried to say, being respectful to people with different points of views, trying to express our points of views, listening carefully to other people's points of views. And I so appreciate your willingness to show up tonight and let someone who is sometimes pretty controversial with some folks share humbly my point of view on this. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.